The sky above Ivy Lane was the color of wet cement, heavy with the kind of rain that seeps into your bones. The streets of the small Texas town were nearly empty, the few passers-by tucked into their coats, umbrellas struggling against the wind. But Daniel Whitaker, just 23, walked without either. His shoes were soaked, his backpack heavier than usual, not just with books, but with the weight of 1,000 invisible things: unpaid student loans, medical bills left behind by his father's death, and the quiet desperation that had begun to wrap itself around his soul. Daniel was in his final year at law school, juggling 2 part-time jobs and barely scraping by. He hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks, and every time he thought about his mother, frail, soft-spoken, fading with each hospital visit, something inside him sank a little deeper. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He nearly ignored it, but he didn't. "Hello?" he answered, breath fogging in the chill air. A woman's voice replied, calm, deliberate, like the click of a lock turning. "Mr. Whitaker, this is Isadora Langley. I'd like to speak with you, in person." Daniel frowned, confused. "I'm sorry. Who?" "I believe I can help you with your financial situation," she continued, ignoring his question. "Meet me at Langley's tea room, 7 o'clock, tonight." Before he could respond, the line went dead. He stood there for a moment, staring at his screen, trying to figure out if what just happened was real, or if exhaustion had finally blurred the line between dreams and reality. That evening, after checking in on his mother and heating a can of soup for dinner, Daniel found himself standing in front of Langley's tea room, a small ivy-covered cafe that looked more like an antique shop than a restaurant. The windows glowed softly in the gray dusk, casting warm amber light onto the wet sidewalk. Inside, a single table was occupied near the back. A woman sat alone, her silver hair sculpted into perfect waves, a string of pearls resting gently against her navy blue blouse. She didn't look up from her tea, but she knew. "You're late," she said. Daniel approached slowly, his hands still in his jacket pockets. "Miss Langley?" he asked. She looked up with cool, sharp eyes. "Please, sit." He did. And for a moment, the clinking of porcelain and the low hum of rain against the windows were the only sounds between them. Then she said the last thing he expected. "Marry me." Daniel stared at her across the table, stunned into silence. Outside, the rain pattered against the windows like quiet applause for a play he hadn't agreed to join. "I'm sorry." "What?" he finally managed. Isadora Langley didn't flinch. She stirred her tea once, slowly, then set the spoon aside with the grace of a woman who had rehearsed every gesture. "This isn't about love, Mr. Whitaker," she said calmly. "I'm offering you a contract, a partnership, with very clear terms." Daniel blinked. "You want to marry me, like, legally, on paper?" "Correct." "Why?" Isadora folded her hands on the table. Her nails were perfectly manicured, her ring finger bare. "I'm 71 years old. I have no children, no living relatives. I've built a legacy in this town, properties, charities, investments. And when I'm gone, I intend for it to remain intact. But certain protections, legal and otherwise, are easier with a spouse. Not a caretaker, not a friend, a husband." Daniel tried to laugh, but the sound came out dry and thin. "This is insane." "And yet," she said, leaning forward just slightly, "you came here. You're listening. Because I know your reality. Tuition, your mother's medical bills, your sister's college dreams hanging by a thread." Her voice softened, just enough to draw blood. "I know what desperation smells like, Daniel, and I know how quickly it silences pride." He looked down at his hands, the fingers that had once helped his father fix cars, the hands that now trembled while holding coffee cups in the campus library, trying to stay awake long enough to read another chapter. "And what do you get?" he asked finally. "What do I offer you?" Isadora's eyes glinted, not unkindly. "You're young, presentable, intelligent, and importantly, unattached. I don't want affection. I don't need intimacy. I want companionship, appearances, and someone I can trust not to complicate things." Daniel stood abruptly, the chair scraping the tile. "I can't. This is..." It's too much. It's not right. Take your time, Isadora replied, unfazed. But not too much. The offer expires in 72 hours. That night, Daniel sat at the tiny kitchen table in their rented duplex across from his mother. She was pale, her breath short from another round of treatments, her sweater loose on her small frame. He told her everything. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She only looked at him with tired, watery eyes and said, "Sometimes, dignity looks different than we imagined." "You're asking me to marry someone I don't love," he whispered. "For money, for survival." "I'm asking you," she said gently, "to save yourself. And us. If she's offering a ladder, Daniel, maybe it's time you stopped drowning." 3 days later, under a pale blue sky that felt too quiet for such an unusual morning, Daniel stood in front of a courthouse wearing a charcoal suit he didn't own. The fabric had arrived neatly packaged the day before, tailored to his measurements without a single word exchanged. Beside him, Isadora Langley stood in a silk cream jacket, a hat with a lace veil pinned gently over her silver hair. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Everything had already been arranged. There was no music, no family, no flowers. Just a notary, her estate lawyer, and a legal assistant checking off boxes with a pen that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the clerk announced dryly, more like someone filing paperwork than marking a moment of union. Isadora finally turned to him. Her smile was polite, controlled, measured. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Whitaker." Daniel swallowed hard, forcing a nod. As they stepped outside, the wind picked up. The breeze lifted her veil and tousled his hair. A passing car splashed through a nearby puddle, and Daniel caught sight of his reflection. Two people standing side by side who couldn't have been further apart. He wondered, have I just rescued my family? Or walked into a trap I won't be able to escape? The drive to the estate was quiet. When the black sedan pulled up to the gates of Langley Manor, Daniel leaned forward instinctively. It wasn't a home, it was a museum. Massive columns rose toward the sky, stone lions flanking the marble steps. Everything screamed wealth, but nothing felt alive. The wrought iron gates creaked open like an ancient warning. The tires whispered over the gravel. The mansion came closer, larger, colder. Inside, the foyer gleamed with polished wood and chandeliers the size of small cars. A butler with white gloves and a face carved from discipline opened the door for them. He didn't smile. "Mr. Whitaker," Isadora said, her tone as neutral as a weather report. "This is your home now. You'll find your room upstairs, second on the left. Dinner is at 7. Daniel nodded, suitcase in hand. The housekeeper led him to his room. It was enormous, elegant, the kind of space he used to study in magazines while eating ramen. Yet, as he stepped inside, it felt less like a bedroom and more like a stage, a room untouched by real life. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over trimmed hedges and marble fountains. The bed was perfectly made. The closet was full. The air smelled like lavender and something more subtle, emptiness. That evening, Daniel sat stiffly at the far end of a dining table that could seat 30. Isadora sat at the other, her pearl earrings glinting beneath the chandelier. The meal was exquisite: seared duck, truffle risotto, and a dessert he couldn't pronounce. But everything about the evening felt theatrical. He took a bite and glanced down the long table. "You didn't mention your late husband," he said carefully. Isadora's knife paused mid-cut. "He was a businessman," she said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "He and your father crossed paths once or twice." Her tone chilled. "Not all meetings end well." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" She looked at him. "I mean, unfinished business has a way of echoing through time." She took another sip of wine. "You'll understand, eventually, why I chose you." Her words hung in the air like fog. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. The mattress was soft. The sheets were silk. But the silence inside that house pressed down on him like snow piling up on a roof, beautiful and suffocating at the same time. By the third day, Daniel knew the mansion like a maze. The halls stretched endlessly, lined with portraits of stern faces and gilded frames. Each corridor led to another set of heavy oak doors, some of which opened with ease. while others remained locked, their brass handles polished, untouched. The silence was the most unsettling part. The staff, perfectly dressed, perfectly trained, moved like ghosts. They didn't speak unless spoken to. They averted their eyes when Daniel passed, and more than once he caught them glancing at him when they thought he wasn't looking. Whispers in corners, conversations that stopped the moment he entered the room. One afternoon, while wandering the West Wing, Daniel paused outside a narrow hallway lined with velvet wallpaper and low-hanging chandeliers. A woman's voice floated from the parlor, Isadora's voice. Calm, controlled. He doesn't know, but he will. Daniel's heart thudded. He stepped closer, but the door shut just as he reached it. Silence again. That night he sat alone in the estate's vast library. The fireplace burned low, casting golden flickers across rows of untouched books. The air smelled like leather and age, and then something caught his eye. Isadora's desk stood beneath the tall windows. Its surface was cluttered, papers, an antique pen, a glass orb filled with marbles, and a small, ornate key. It gleamed in the lamplight, delicate and detailed, its bow shaped like a flower curling in on itself. Daniel's breath caught. His gaze darted toward the hallway. No footsteps, no voices. He reached out. The key was heavier than it looked, cold in his hand. He didn't know what it opened, but something in him said it wasn't just a drawer. He slipped it into his pocket and walked slowly back to his room, his footsteps muffled by the long rug beneath his feet. That night, lying in a bed that felt like it belonged to someone else, Daniel held the key up to the ceiling and whispered to no one. "What are you hiding, Isadora?" The next morning, he couldn't focus at breakfast. Isadora sat across the table, sipping her black coffee, flipping through the newspaper. He stared at her hands, steady, precise. There was nothing about her that didn't seem rehearsed. After breakfast, she left for a board meeting in town. Daniel waited an hour, pacing like a prisoner in his own skin. Then he made his move. Down the eastern hallway, past the portraits and the grandfather clock, stood a locked door he'd noticed on his second day. It was different. No plaque, no light under the threshold. Just a heavy door, silent as stone. He pulled the key from his pocket. His fingers trembled. The lock clicked, and the door opened. The room inside was a different world. Dust coated the furniture, curtains drawn. The air smelled like paper and memories. Photos lined the shelves, black and white portraits of a younger Isadora. A man beside her, tall, dark-haired, always with a hand on her back. Daniel assumed it was her late husband. There were others too. Images of charity galas, real estate projects, ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But it was the stack of papers on the old desk that made his chest tighten. Letters, contracts, legal documents, and then a familiar name. James Whitaker, his father. Daniel's breath caught. One letter in particular was addressed to him, in elegant, sharp handwriting. "You ruined everything. My family was left with nothing because of your lies. He died because of the stress. And now, your son will pay the price you escaped." Daniel's knees nearly gave out. This wasn't a marriage, this was a vendetta. He turned to leave, and that's when he heard it. The floorboard creaked, and a voice, cold as the lock he had just picked, cut through the dark. "Enjoying yourself, Mr. Whitaker?" Daniel froze, still clutching the stack of papers. The air in the room shifted, as though the house itself had exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. Isadora stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the low light of the hallway. Gone was the composed elegance, the perfect posture. Her face was a cold mask now, stone and steel. "You went through my things," she said flatly. Daniel turned, the letter still in his hand. "You lied to me." She stepped into the room, slowly, like a hunter not afraid of her prey. "I gave you exactly what I promised. A roof, a future, a way out." He held the letter up like a weapon. "You didn't want a husband. You wanted a pawn. A living reminder of the man you couldn't destroy." Her eyes flashed. "Your father destroyed my husband's business. He stole everything. Harold died a ruined man, with a broken heart and a shattered name. Daniel's voice rose, sharp and shaking. And you think marrying me, using me, is justice? I was a child when that happened. You were his legacy, she hissed. His name, his blood, and now, mine. The room fell silent. Only the wind against the tall windows made a sound. Daniel set the papers down slowly, carefully. I came here thinking I'd sold my pride, he said quietly. But I didn't know I was selling my soul. Isadora's face softened, just for a second. Just long enough to reveal a flicker of something else beneath the cold. Grief, maybe? Or regret? I didn't plan to feel anything, she said. He blinked. What? You remind me of Harold, she whispered. The way he used to argue when he believed he was right. The way his hands shook when he was furious. You carry the same fire, but none of his sins. Daniel took a step forward, heart pounding. Then let me go. She shook her head, a bitter smile playing at the edge of her lips. It's not that simple. Not anymore. Why not? Isadora turned, walking to the fireplace. She poured herself a glass of brandy, hand steady. Because you've already been added to the estate trust. Because my legal team has ensured you're now woven into every part of what I built. Daniel stared at her. So I'm locked in. She raised her glass. No, Daniel, you're part of the foundation now, whether you like it or not. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The walls felt smaller, the air heavier. Everything he had believed, about rescue, about security, had collapsed into dust. He sat at the edge of his bed, the ornate key still in his hand. And for the first time since his father's funeral, he wept. Not out of fear, but out of fury. He had been chosen for a war he never started. And now, he would choose how it ended. By morning, Daniel had a plan. Not a perfect one, but it was a start. He couldn't confront Isadora again, not yet. She held too many keys, both literal and legal, and he couldn't just leave, not without unraveling the knots she'd tied around his name, his finances, and now his very identity. So he did what law students are trained to do best. He started gathering evidence. It began in whispers. The staff had always avoided him. Nervous glances, silent meals. But now, Daniel looked for the cracks. He watched carefully, listened more. And before long, he noticed something. They weren't loyal. They were afraid. One man in particular, Mr. Bennett, the head of the house staff, stood out. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that never quite met Isadora's. Daniel approached him carefully one afternoon in the rose garden. Mr. Bennett, Daniel said quietly, can I ask you something off the record? The older man hesitated, pruning shears paused in his hands. That depends, sir. Daniel lowered his voice. Why are you still here? Bennett didn't answer immediately. Then he said, some of us don't get to choose the debts we carry, and some debts aren't paid in money. Daniel stared at him. Do you know what she's doing? Bennett finally met his eyes. I know enough to be worried for you, and enough to tell you this. If you're planning something, do it carefully. Daniel nodded. I'm not just trying to get out of this. I want to expose it. Bennett looked around, then slipped a folded slip of paper from his pocket into Daniel's hand. A name and number. Peter Grayson. A friend. A lawyer. Call him, Bennett said. Tell him you're not safe. That evening, Daniel sat in the library, surrounded by old estate ledgers and legal documents. He read through contracts that bore his signature, some of which he didn't remember signing. Others had been amended after the wedding. Isadora had made sure of one thing. She owned his name, his face, his story. But the more Daniel uncovered, the more a picture began to form, not just of revenge, but of desperation. She wasn't just trying to ruin his father's legacy, she was trying to rebuild hers. Shady business deals, falsified reports, financial moves that danced dangerously close to illegal. The paper trail was there. It was just buried beneath silk and charm. And then he found it. Tucked inside a drawer in her study, sealed in a plain envelope, a letter addressed to his father. You left us with nothing. My husband's heart failed under the weight of your lies. He died, and you went on living. But I will not let that go unpunished. Daniel's throat tightened as he read it again. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't even about justice. It was grief. Twisted. Hardened. Weaponized. The next day, Daniel called the number Bennett had given him. Peter Grayson answered on the second ring. You don't know me, Daniel began, but I think I married into a prison. Peter Grayson was exactly the kind of man you'd hope would pick up the phone when you're standing on the edge of a cliff. Calm, sharp, no nonsense. A graduate of the same law school Daniel attended, Peter had spent the last decade working with whistleblowers, wrongful imprisonment cases, and people tangled in legal webs spun by the wealthy and vindictive. He didn't flinch when Daniel explained his story. She married you under false pretenses, Peter said. That's enough to challenge the marriage contract, especially if we can prove coercion or intent to defraud. Daniel let out a shaky breath. There's more than intent. There's a diary, letters, financial tampering. She forged post-marriage amendments. Peter paused on the other end. Okay, he said slowly. That's big. But you'll need more than just documentation. You'll need safety. If she's calculated enough to marry you for revenge, she might be willing to do worse to protect the secret. Daniel looked out the window at the estate's sprawling lawn. Somewhere down there, Isadora was likely sipping afternoon tea, reading the paper, checking investments, planning the next move. I think I'm already past safe, he murmured. The plan they formed was simple on the surface. Gather, duplicate, disappear. Daniel began photographing documents with a burner phone Peter had couriered to the estate through a delivery driver. Every evening, once the staff had retired and Isadora was in her drawing room, Daniel would slip into her office and scan ledgers, letters, and legal files. He kept backup copies hidden in a hollow book in the library, just in case. But secrets have a smell, and after a week of careful maneuvering, Isadora began to notice. At first it was subtle. Her questions grew more pointed. What were you doing after dinner, Daniel? She appeared in rooms he hadn't expected her in. And then one night she said simply, You've been busy lately. Are you adjusting or digging? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The smile that followed was colder than any wind the estate had ever known. That night, he returned to his room to find the drawer where he'd hidden the burner phone slightly ajar. The phone was gone. His heart dropped. So was the hollow book. The next morning, Daniel approached Mr. Bennett in the garden. She knows. The butler nodded slowly, his eyes weary. I thought she might. She took the phone, the files, everything. Bennett reached into his coat and pulled out a small black flash drive. You're not the only one who's been collecting insurance, he said. I've been with this family since I was 19. I've seen things, heard things, things no one believed. Daniel blinked. Why didn't you leave? Bennett looked toward the mansion. Some prisons? You stay in because they're familiar. Others because you're afraid of what happens when the doors open. Daniel clenched the flash drive in his hand. I'm opening the door. That evening, Daniel slipped away to a payphone at the edge of town, a mile walk in the dark under a moonless sky. He called Peter, breathless, hands still shaking. She found everything, but I have a new backup from one of the staff. Peter whistled low. You have friends in that house. That's good. That's rare. I want out, Peter. I want this annulled, exposed, burned down if I have to. There was a pause on the line. You'll have it, Peter said. But Daniel, from here on out, every move you make needs to be precise. Quiet. No mistakes. Daniel looked back toward the faint outline of the estate in the distance. Its windows glowed faintly in the dark. A gilded cage lit from within. For the next few days, the estate was wrapped in a chilling calm. Dinner was served on time. The flowers were trimmed. Isadora wore her usual silk robes and said all the right things. But Daniel could feel it, the shift, like the temperature in a room dropping without explanation. She knew. And now, she was waiting for him to blink. More tea, Daniel? she asked one morning, lifting the porcelain pot with a dainty motion. He nodded. Thank you. Her smile was pleasant, measured. I do hope you're settling in now. I'd hate for you to feel out of place. I think we both know I never quite fit, he replied. She sipped. Not yet, perhaps. But you will. You're adaptable. Clever. Determined. There was a beat of silence. Then she added with a glint in her eye. Just like your father. Daniel didn't flinch. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I'm nothing like him. She set her cup down. No? He kept secrets too. Wore charm like a suit. Played innocent until the ink dried on someone else's ruin. Daniel leaned forward, his voice quiet but sure. You married a boy with a dying mother and drowning finances. You didn't see a person. You saw a weapon. Isadora's smile didn't fade. You call it manipulation, she said. I call it symmetry, poetic justice. The sins of the father returned in the shape of his son. That night, Daniel wrote his statement for Peter. It was cold, factual, legal. But underneath the bullet points and timestamps, it bled. He included details of the marriage proposal, the initial deception, the documents altered after their vows, and the growing psychological manipulation. Peter replied with one sentence. This is enough, but be careful. Cornered people don't break, they bite. Isadora began tightening her grip. The staff was shuffled. Bennett was sent on leave. Phone access was restricted. For estate security, she claimed. The more Daniel tried to move discreetly, the more walls appeared. He found his car keys missing. His internet access slowed. One night, while attempting to access his email, the screen went black and a soft voice echoed behind him. You're playing a very dangerous game, Daniel. He turned. Isadora stood in the doorway, framed by the golden light of the hall. She stepped forward, slowly. Do you think I don't see you? She said. Do you think I don't know the look of someone plotting an exit? I don't want your fortune, Daniel said. I don't want your estate. I want my name back. My freedom, that's all. She laughed, low, bitter. Freedom? You had that, and you sold it the moment you signed those papers. Daniel stood, voice rising. Because you gave me no choice. She walked closer, her expression hardening. You're in my world now, Daniel. My name, my rules, my game. He stepped back, his voice a whisper. Then you should know. I never lose when I'm fighting for the truth. Her gaze narrowed. Be careful, she said. Some truths can burn more than lies. The next morning, Daniel found a note beneath his door. No signature, just 4 words. She's watching the lawyer. His stomach sank. Peter. Daniel stood frozen in the hallway, the unsigned note still clutched in his hand. She's watching the lawyer. His blood ran cold. Every move Peter made, every email, every call, they could be compromised. He needed to act. Fast. He waited until evening when Isadora retired early to her drawing room, as she often did. He slipped outside, boots crunching on gravel, and made his way down the winding estate path to the old maintenance shed where Bennett had once taken smoke breaks. Inside, hidden behind a rusted toolbox, he had taped a prepaid burner phone just for this purpose. He dialed. Peter answered on the second ring. Daniel, you okay? No, he whispered. She's on to you. Someone left me a note. No signature, but I believe it. You need to stop using the email. Go dark. Peter swore under his breath. I'll switch to a secure line. We'll use dead drops from now on. Daniel's fingers trembled. We don't have much time. Back at the estate, the tension was thicker than the storm rolling in over the horizon. Isadora didn't speak to him for 2 days. She didn't need to. The silence was calculated. Surgical. A message in itself. But Daniel pressed on. Every night he copied more files. Every afternoon, he slipped them into manila folders and handed them off to a new courier Peter had hired, an elderly man who pretended to deliver herbs from the garden, always humming old blues tunes as he walked. And then, on a gray Wednesday, Peter called with news. We have enough. Financial fraud, Contract manipulation. Intentional coercion. The marriage can be annulled. She'll lose everything if it's challenged in court. Daniel felt a wave of disbelief. And then something worse. Relief, mixed with dread. He knew Isadora wouldn't let go quietly. That evening, Isadora summoned him to the sitting room. She was dressed in deep plum, her hair pinned back, makeup flawless. She stood by the fireplace, a glass of sherry in one hand, eyes fixed on the flames. "You've been busy," she said without turning. Daniel didn't respond. "I thought I saw something in you," she murmured. "I thought perhaps you'd understand, but you're just like the rest." "I'm nothing like you," he said, steady. Now she turned. "You betrayed me," she said, "after everything I gave you." "You gave me a cage." She stepped forward. "I gave you survival. You bought my silence." "But you forgot one thing," he said. "I didn't come here to disappear. I came here to live." "You want justice? Fine. Take it up with the court. But I'm done being your penance." Her voice dropped to a cold whisper. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." Daniel looked her in the eye. "I do now, and that's why I'm leaving." The next morning, Daniel walked out the front door of Langley Manor for the last time. Peter was waiting in the car at the gate, legal documents tucked safely in a leather briefcase. Inside were not only the annulment papers, but also a civil suit. If Isadora pushed back, she would lose more than a husband. She would lose the empire she'd clawed her way into. Isadora stood in the window, still and silent as the car pulled away. She didn't wave, she didn't speak, and she didn't stop him. But Daniel knew the silence wasn't surrender. It was a warning. The courtroom was quiet, sterile, and cold. Daniel sat in the witness chair, palms sweating slightly beneath the table. Across from him, Isadora Langley sat with her arms folded, dressed in black, her face expressionless. Her high-priced legal team flanked her on both sides, murmuring softly. But she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence, as always, said enough. The proceedings lasted 3 days. Peter Grayson presented the timeline, the contracts, the evidence of coercion, letters, audio recordings, statements from Bennett and other estate staff. He showed how Isadora had manipulated Daniel into a legal arrangement disguised as marriage, with the intent of using his name and legacy to settle her own score. He played a short, shaking clip, the note she wrote to Daniel's father, never sent but saved for years like kindling. "You ruined us. You walked away with your name intact. But I will take from you what you took from me." It wasn't just anger. It was grief turned to ice. Isadora testified briefly. She denied nothing. Her words were calm. Her voice carried no tremble. "Yes," she said. "I married him with full awareness of his last name. Yes, I tied his name to mine to strengthen my estate. No, I didn't love him. But I never promised love. I promised safety. I offered rescue. He accepted." The courtroom held its breath. Peter stood. "You offered survival, Ms. Langley, but what you delivered was entrapment." She didn't flinch. He knew the terms. But he didn't know the reason. The judge recessed for a day. Daniel sat on a bench outside the courthouse, watching the wind stir the trees. Peter came out quietly and sat beside him. "She's losing," he said. "The annulment will go through. The suit might take longer, but this is the turning point." Daniel nodded, though he didn't smile. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. The next morning, the judge read the verdict. The marriage was declared nullified. The court recognized coercion and emotional manipulation as the basis. Isadora would retain her personal assets, but the estate's trust, rewritten under Daniel's name, would revert back to a neutral executor pending further litigation. In legal terms, it was a clean win. In emotional terms, it was a scar that would take years to fade. As the courtroom cleared, Daniel turned one last time. Isadora remained seated, her lawyer gathering papers. She didn't rise. She didn't look away. Their eyes met, and for the first time she seemed smaller. Not defeated, Not broken, but human. She gave him a faint nod, almost a bow. Daniel returned it. Then he walked out the doors into the sun. Weeks later, a package arrived at Daniel's apartment. No return address. Inside, a single envelope. Handwritten. Daniel, I thought revenge would give me peace, but I was wrong. You reminded me what grief looks like in someone who didn't deserve it. I don't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. What we built was never real. But the lesson was, don't let the darkness I gave you become your future. Isadora. In time, Daniel returned to law school. He paid off his family's debts with what remained of his savings. He never touched the estate trust again. Instead, he founded a nonprofit legal clinic for victims of coercive contracts and financial abuse. He called it the Langley Foundation for Truth, not to honor her name, but to reclaim it, for good. On a warm spring afternoon, Daniel stood in front of a group of students, sharing his story for the first time. Sometimes, he said, we sign things we don't understand. We agree to things out of fear, out of love, out of hope. But when we discover the truth, the real courage isn't in fighting back. It's in moving forward. The students rose, applauding. And Daniel looked up at the sky, finally clear. He had made it out, not untouched, but unbroken.